and welcome to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast. Each week we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe who offer exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the TTS Talking Early Years podcast on understanding children's behaviour. And today I'm going to be chatting with Kate Silverton. Now, you might be a bit more familiar with Kate due to her extensive work as a BBC journalist. Now, that could be her reporting from the front line on the Second Iraqi War or behind the news desk on BBC Breakfast. Or plus, I'm sure lots of you, like I do, remember her fantastic Foxtrot with the amazing Alias from the 2018 series of Strictly Come Dancing. I mean, that is the dream right there, Kate. But for the last few years, Kate has gone back to academic roots and is now retrained as a child therapist. So Kate is now a child trauma specialist and supports children with a variety of needs in both primary and secondary school. Kate also dedicates her spare time to a number of children's charities, including being an ambassador for Place to Be, which is a children's mental health organisation that lots of you will be familiar with. So she is passionate about sharing and simplifying, which is the really good bit, the science behind children's behaviour. And her book, There Is No Such Thing as Naughty, which we will be unpicking a little bit later, is a Sunday Times #1 bestseller. So with that massively impressive introduction, I'm really looking forward to getting into conversation with Kate Silverton. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so looking forward to this, Alistair.
Well, and me too. So could you just start by giving everybody a little bit more about your background and how you've ended up where you are now?
Yes, I can. So I think you summed it up. Thank you for that lovely introduction, by the way. And I've really come full circle, going back to my academic roots. And it's funny, isn't it? Because for me, it feels like I'm exactly where I should be. And I'm loving the work that I'm doing, and we'll talk about it. But I also appreciate for people, it's a bit like, hang on, what? You've done what? You've left the BBC and you're doing this. So my academic background, my degree at Durham, an area that I know you're familiar with.
Yes.
Durham University, and I read psychology and specialising in child psychology. It's always been an area that I have been passionately interested in. And then my journalism then took over, being a very curious person and travelling a lot. And so I went into journalism. But it's always been bubbling away. And so for many years, I was volunteering with a lot of children's charities, the Anna Freud Centre, NSPCC, Place to Be, as you mentioned. So I was doing a lot of work behind the scenes and information gathering and just, again, I have a very curious brain. So when I then was very lucky to fall pregnant, and I say that because we struggled for many, many years, and I fell pregnant naturally and very unexpectedly at sort of 40 and then again 43. And my husband is a Royal Marines commando, and he turned to me 6 weeks into having our first baby, and he was like, blow me. He said, getting my green beret was easier than this. Like, what?
What have we done?
Nobody tells you this. And so I sort of then, as a both parent, and I guess because I wanted to learn about my own children and how to be, as we all do. And, I know we've got lots of parent carers and practitioners listening. We all want to do what's right by children. And I just thought, I don't know if I'm, nobody told me about this. What are these toddler tantrums? So I then, because I'd had this lovely connection with so many charities, I was able to literally say to one or two, well, quite a few actually in the end, child psychiatrist Dick and Bevington, I was like, Dickon, can you just get your brain and bring it over? And can we have a cup of tea? And so he literally brought this big brain that he brings for his teaching and sat down. I was like, just talk to me about what is going on for our children. How do I understand? So it really began from, as I say, and also it's really important to say, my own psychotherapy journey. And I think it's really important because when we do our work, as anyone that's done it will know what I mean by that, it ain't easy. And so I had been in my own, understanding myself as a person. And so that journey taught me a lot about how what we experience when we're very young shapes the adult that we become.
Absolutely.
And just how important it is. And to get that, we are all in the brain development business, essentially, whether we're parents, whether we're practitioners, we are in brain development. And I know we're going to talk about that. But so I just then went on this big mission of research and talking to lots of people like people be familiar with Bruce Perry, for example, an incredible sort of trauma specialist and psychiatrist, Professor Peter Fonagy over here, Gabor Matic, lots of different practitioners, Margot Sunderland. And I was just thirsty for knowledge. And that's the journalist side of me. So what I was learning about the neuroscience blew me away. Yeah. Because suddenly it made sense. I understood my own behavior, but then, because of all the work I'd been doing, but equally, when you look at it from the perspective of my children who were living that, I then suddenly realized that tantrums are not naughty and children should be put on a naughty step and punished. They're in the middle of a stress response. Yeah. There is a neurophysiological response going on, a neurochemical wildfire, and our children need to be helped with their emotional regulation. And how fundamental that is, and if anyone's familiar with the work of people like Alan Shaw, for example, Alan Shaw will say that the fundamental principles of good mental health start with emotional regulation. Because actually, he says, emotional dysregulation is at the root of psychiatric disorders. So you start thinking, hang on, when were you or when was I taught about emotional regulation?
Never. And both as adults and as parents and then as practitioners. But I think I'm the same. When you get that penny drop moment where you think, this is not my child vindictively trying to make my life a misery. This is not my child choosing to do something that is literally so mortifyingly embarrassing in Tesco's, I just want to die. This is actually my child, in a way, demonstrating their emotional and cognitive development, which is an impressive thing. You're thinking, there was a time when my child didn't have the ability to tantrum because it wasn't, or they weren't able to make those decisions. They weren't feeling those feelings. And now that they are actually expressing themselves in that way, they're showing development. Yeah, I mean, it's not great in the middle of Tesco's, but it is that kind of development. I think as a parent, it allows you just to take a breath and think, well, what can I do then? Rather than get cross or anxious, which is difficult, what can I do to support my child in their development? Or they are having an emotional response. What can I do to calm that response? And I think one of the trickiest bits for me, as well as a parent of now 3 grown lads, is that I also parented a lot the way that I was parented, especially in moments of stress. So when they were melting down in Tesco's, that kind of inner parent, which is not always your best parent, comes out because you're dealing with that stress response. But acknowledging that as a truth also means that when you feel that beginning to bubble up, you know what's happening. So you're like, right, this doesn't feel great. I can see where this is going. I know this is not the best route to take. Therefore, can we calm it down? And I think similarly, in a learning environment, whether that be the nursery, the classroom, childminder, wherever you are, when you're dealing with other people's children, you're dealing with other people's parenting styles. But when these things pop up, and they can do it like whack-a-mole, and sometimes it feels like, I remember being a reception teacher and sometimes thinking the children would just tag team each other because you'd literally just get one situation managed and another one would pop up. But if you have a different lens through which you view that, which is more scientifically based, then I think it gives you empowerment to be able to do something about it rather than just feel like you're drowning.
Absolutely that. And that's where I come from now with the work that I'm doing. I'm passionate about empowering adults to understand children, but coming at it from the science. This is not, I don't work in an opinion base. It's like, I'm not interested in opinion. Yeah. I want facts, and give me the facts, because the same way that the light bulb goes on for those of us when we, as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. But yes. As soon as you know the science, you can't unknow it, if you know what I mean. So as you say, and by the way, that contagion, there is such a thing as stress contagion. So when we are, I think that's also really interesting for practitioners to know that if a baboon in the wild, one baboon spies a leopard and starts beating his chest in alarm, it triggers what is called a stress contagion. And all the other baboons, they might not have seen the leopard, but they will start beating their chest because that stress is meant to be catching, because that's how we
save your life. Yeah.
It's like if our children, if the environment feels stressful, you're going to get a whole load of little baboons. And I'm sure we'll talk about my metaphor, which is, how I think of the limbic system as a little baboon, this sort of little animal that is very social, but at the same time has big emotions. So we can start thinking, okay, if they're all getting stressed at the same time and they're spreading it to one another, what can I do to make the whole environment feeling a little bit more safe? But you've raised like a brilliant number of points, and it's our own stress response that, of course, does mean in that moment that if we go into fight flight, that it's very hard unless we're able to take that breath. And so with that, with the first book, I've just handed the second one in, so I've got that in my
exciting.
I know. The first book, which is for the sort of 0 to 5s, I talk about, and I thought, what makes sense to me? And so my brain works in a bit of a funny way, ADHD, formally diagnosed, so it's a little bit lovely sort of ping pong balls all over the place. And I thought, what makes sense to me? I like to have things, the science is big and it's complex, and you've got names like the cerebellum and the arachnoid and the pons, and you kind of go, oh, just talk to me so I would sit and read all these big scientific papers, and I'd speak to all these incredible scientists whom I adore and fangirl. But I needed something simple in the heat of the moment that could remind me this is not personal. So I came up with a metaphor, which helped me to remember, but also things like, and I'm all about practical tips. What can we do in the heat of the moment? Because it's all very well saying to everybody, especially when you've got not 1-on-1, but you're 1-on-20 or, 1-on-30 when you start going into reception, as you know. How can we really help people in that moment? So we need practical. So one of them I threw in was called Stop Snot. And so when your child goes into that Tesco meltdown, right, and there is snot everywhere, you've got to go stop, first of all, right? In my head, I've got to stop. And and that just gives you that pause, that moment of, let me just take a breath. I'm just going to remind myself, stop, and then snot. It's snot personal.
Love it.
So you just go, stop, take that breath. Snot personal, and then the O and the T is observe what's going on. They're in the middle of a stress response. And then the T for think. What can I now do about that? And then you can kind of get underneath the behavior. And I'm really happy to talk about that in more practical ways. But
we will discuss baboons.
It's important, I think, sometimes. How? And I'm like, okay, let's do the how. But anyway, we won't do it right now.
And it's tricky, because if we take the Tesco scenario, you're in Tesco's, you're tired, you've had to take your child because there's nobody else to look after them. They're tired, they're hungry. There are all sorts of other things that are going on in the background. So often when we talk about it, and I talk to parents and practitioners about it, and these are really handy things, especially when you know it's not personal. But in the moment, it's also about controlling your stress response first. A bit like when you're in an aeroplane, they say, put your own mask on before you put somebody else's on. Yeah. You've got to try and think, right, I am not responding well to this. And also, for me, it's the shame element, the fact everybody tuts at you, or you think they are. But to be fair, if they've got children, 100% of the people who are looking at you funny in the frozen food aisle of Tesco's have been through the same thing at some point. Yeah. So I think partly as well, you've just not got to be that bothered. But I think your point is a really good one about the kind of the baboons and the beating of the chest, and the fact that you can have this contagion. Because if, as an adult, say you're a practitioner in a space with young children, and you are managing what is become a difficult situation when children are giving stress response, and you do that by coming in, as we're often taught to do as educators, with a higher volume that kind of says, right, everybody stop, oh, look at me. You just lift everything, and then everybody goes on to high alert, because now he's shouting, now he's gesticulating, and then their fear response kicks in. They're not then thinking in their brains that have only been developed for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So it's that idea of sometimes for us as practitioners in early years, challenging some of those myths around compliance is the same as engagement, or that compliant behavior is something that we should be as a badge of honor. And again, there are examining authorities like Ofsted, who will come in and look at how well you can control your 3-year-olds and your 4-year-olds. And actually what we're not doing is allowing those 3, 4 and 5-year-olds to give authentic emotional responses. And if we think about children who are neurodivergent and are processing in a different way anyway, then there's no room for them to process the language, the emotion, the situation in the way that they understand it, because it's only been delivered in one particular way.
Isn't it? It's sort of, we get this cycle, and we both I work in a primary school now, and I also appreciate that I'm working one-on-one with children, and the children I'm working with have very high need, sort of complex cases. So I appreciate it is different, but actually, I think we can make it easier for ourselves, all of us, whether we're therapists, parents, teachers, practitioners. We make it easier for ourselves. I think this is the fallacy and the myth that's sort of arisen of control, control, control. That's how you do it. Yeah. Actually, I think it makes the job more difficult, because exactly as you've said, what we end up doing, we have to step into our baboon, and we are then in fight, flight. And even as we're talking, and I think this is where, so my work now, I work very somatically as well. So, and if anyone's a therapist listening, we talk about transference, where I can feel in my body where my fizz is, where my stress response. And I can feel, because I'm doing an interview with you, and it's important that I get the right, important that I get things right, and it's important that I slow down and not because I get so excited talking about it. And so, when we understand that emotional our thoughts are sort of measured by the brain as threatening as physical events, because our brain hasn't evolved to distinguish between the two. So I'm going to get a stress response. Now I can overcome that. But being aware of what's going on in our bodies. So if you're in front of your class, just to sort of take that step and think, hang on, am I now having a bit of a fizzy moment? And if I'm having a fizzy moment, I'm going to create more fizz among these children. So what can I do to make myself feel safe? So we start to think about safety and what makes me feel more secure in the classroom, or, for me in the room, and how can I help the children to feel safer? And there's lots of lovely ways to scaffold that. I talk about bonding benches. I talk about letting the children come in and explore the room, really explore it, because anything that is unfamiliar or that feels sort of new is initially going to feel unsafe to that little brain, of a 3, 4, especially sort of younger. So therefore, you're going to get a child who is not quite fully able to listen and to engage. So we make our job harder if we feel like we have to keep controlling children, because that puts them into this defensive position, and then nobody wins. So it's about containing, being the container for those children in that room, also for ourselves, and thinking, how am I feeling right now? Do I just need to take a moment, take a breath? The noise is triggering me. I'm a bit worried that I'm going to lose control right now. Take a breath. I've got this. But empowering and equipping school staff and practitioners to actually know the how, because otherwise we then fall back into that control. And I honestly think it's making life more difficult for practitioners, and I think it's certainly not helping children and their mental health.
Absolutely. I think it's about strategies that are effective in calming. And what we do a lot of, because we're trained to do it, is stopping. So you'll get, if you feel like the noise is building, or if you feel like children are probably demonstrating perfectly typical behaviours for a child who's engaged in play, there's lots of clapping goes on, or bells or tambourines. And what that does is stop everybody. So you're in this kind of play flow, and then it all stops. And again, we can process that, and we can see the intent behind it, and we understand what that's all about. But if I'm in the moment and I'm 3 and you just stop that moment, then it's really difficult for me to process that.
Yeah.
So I think you're dead right in that as practitioners and as parents, it is a super hard job. We can't get right into the head of the children that we are working with. We don't know necessarily what thoughts or interpretations of the world they're bringing with them, which certainly won't be ours. But I think what we can do, and is what we're going to talk about in our next episode, is looking for early signs of when you can see children are beginning to display those kind of behaviors that are indicators, and what we can do about it. So this has brought us beautifully, I think, to the end of our first episode. Thank you so much, Kate. It's just fascinating. I worry that we would need to have like 26 episodes just even to get through what we want to talk about. But thanks for now, Kate. But please join us, everybody, next time when we'll be looking for those early signs and what we can do as practitioners to really support children to manage those strong emotions. I would just like to say a huge thank you to our guest, Kate, for joining us and providing such valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Early Years podcast with me, Alistair Bryce-Clegg, and Kate Silverton. And if you've been inspired by our conversation today, then don't forget, you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your setting and links to relevant resources.